Okay, so today is July 21st, 2020, day 1,000,006 of the COVID pandemic. We're going to be covering the governor vessel and going over some point combinations. I have uploaded some information to the Canvas site. So if you haven't looked there already, you should see the notes for GV, I think in the class 12 module. So it's the week before this one. And then I've uploaded some information regarding point combinations on the Canvas site for this module, module 13. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to shoot me a text or an email. Let me know what's going on. And also, please, as a reminder, I need to have your final exam by next week, okay? Because we got to get the grades in. And honestly and selfishly, I'm going to be too busy to like track you guys down and send you reminder emails and stuff like that. So please get that in. And for those of you who have already sent it in, thank you. Very good. All right, so the governor vessel, really interesting meridian. Again, like the CV, it's different from the 12 primary meridians, although it's CV and GV are often considered relatively primary meridians. They are 8 extraordinary vessels that don't share points on other channels. Like, for example, like Chiang Mai has a lot of points on the kidney meridian and things like that, and the spleen meridian. So similarly to CV, and unlike the other 12, it doesn't really represent like a sub-personality of us, right? I mean, we can all, I think, recognize different attributes of the elements and the officials within us that move us in terms of how we behave in the world, in terms of how we think, in terms of how we be on a spirit level. But CV and GV are much more primal than that. They're much more primordial than that for us. So again, as you know, it goes up the median posterior line of the body, starting from do1, just below the tailbone, and then rising all the way up and over the head, which is really fascinating unto itself, goes over the head and ends at GV28. So the character is interesting, which I've included in the notes. The upper part shows an uncle or a father's younger brother, which is, you know, if you think about the familial dynamics, especially from a Confucian point of view, you know, there's different roles attributed to each member of the family in terms of their birth order and their sex or their gender. And then the lower part shows an eye, which is really interesting. So this implies that there's a type of person who's similar to the younger brother whose responsibility it is to look out for the elder brother. Now, you know, in the West, we think, oh, it's the older brother's job to kind of look out for the younger kids. And it is to some extent, but it's more in terms of making sure that they're behaving correctly, making sure that they're acting appropriately. You know, there's less of a protective sensibility to it and more of a like a ruling, right? So, but this implies though that there's not just a ruling, it's more like a protection quality. And if you think about the nature of GV as the sea of yang, right? You know, the Shen is extremely yang, but that's very insubstantial. Like that's like a cloud or a subtle impulse that moves, right? It's like a phantom. It's a spirit that you can't really point to and see. You can only see its shadow. But the chi is something that, even though it's like relatively insubstantial among the 5 substances, it does have the capacity to be felt and to function in the material world in a very powerful way, more so than the Shen. So it's a relatively yang thing, and we're dealing with the sea of yang, right? So we're dealing with the protective nature of the chi, as well as the other yang aspects of the chi, right? And we'll get to that in a bit. So this implies that there's this younger brother who has the responsibility of looking out for, right? Looking out for the elder brother, maybe even the elder sisters as well. And so in a way, it's kind of reminds me of the saying, you know, I've got your back. Someone's got your back, right? And literally it traverses the back. And again, that is our blind spot, right? So also as predators, you know, in ancient times, I mean, when we had to like rely more on hunting for our food, when we hadn't domesticated animals so much, you know, we had to be wary as we were stalking prey that we weren't also being stalked ourselves. So, you know, you needed to have somebody who could kind of represent the eyes in the back of your head, right? And that's like your protection, right? That's your blind spot. So this implies the 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 young, aggressive, like in the Wei Qi is also called fierce, right? Aspects of the yang qi, right? Which is, in this course, has a lot to do with the yang qi, and we'll get to that in a moment. So I think that's really interesting. So Rishat and Lar, in their book on the 8 Extraordinary Vessels from 1997, and I do highly recommend their books. They are more philosophical in nature. They're not going to be like, hey, how do I treat my patient with this? It's going to be putting you into a certain mindset, a certain frame of mind that allows you to philosophically understand the context and the deep nature and qualitative nature of the different meridians in terms, and in this book in particular, the 8 Extraordinary Vessels, the Qi Jing Ba Mai. So according to Rishat and Lar, Dumai is like a director, and the place from where all different forms of expression can be ruled. And so this is for all the yang functions inside the body, around the body. It's the administrative center, right? Like the capital. It's the principal, right? And it's also implied that there's like, and there's a homophone for this character, which is really interesting, which implies that there's like this rope. And that rope extending down from heaven is like the main rope within this net, right? So, you know, every net has sort of like almost like a spine, if you will, even though they're very flexible, around which all the other network of twine is connected. And that's generally regarded as what like holds the main part of the net together. And so this main rope is for all the yang mai, right? The network that comes off of this main rope are like the 12 meridians. Almost like this is also from another perspective, like this is the sea of yang from which all the rivers of the 12 meridians spring, as well as the CV. And so all the circulation, which is an expression of the yang power, extends from this, right? And so this is to be like a supervisor, like to gather with the CV all the 12 meridians, all the 12 officials into the unity, right? So it's very much like a leader, a director, a general supervisor of all the yang functions in the body. Okay. Jeffrey Yuen calls it the C, or the meridian of individuality, right? But let's quickly go over the functions on a body, mind, spirit level. So on the body, you know, like the CV, it has primary effects along the areas that it traverses, right? So this is obviously the back, the head, the spine, right? And by implication, the back of the legs, the backs of the arms. Obviously, it goes right through the neck. It goes over the head, so it's said to influence the brain, right? And the eyes. Some texts also suggest it represents the ears and the nose and the throat, because to some degree, these are either directly or indirectly connected to our sense organs, right? And to sense is a yang activity, right? So it also enables our upright posture. So one of the ways I think about GV is distinct from CV is that CV is kind of like, I imagine like those like the I don't remember this like old toys called Weebles, like the Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. It's sort of like being inflated from below and you're just kind of like filled up, right? Like at the like at those like used car places where you see like this giant fan inside of like this I don't know, like plastic person that like, you know, the air fills them up and they move around, right? So imagine like slowly like filling them up from below, like being kind of like pumped up with fluids and blood, and that kind of fills you up from the ground up, from the bottom upwards, right? But GV, I feel like more like it pulls us up like a string connected to like do 20, do 21, and we're being extended and pulled up from heaven. So we're not being filled below from the earth. It's like being like held up, right? And so you think about people with like really good posture, right? I think about like a lot of the dancers that I treat, you know, they have like such amazing posture, you know, and they've got a lot of yang energy, these people. So, you know, they get treated with, you know, governor vessel points quite often. So this obviously affects our posture, our ability to have an upright posture. You know, you listen to a lot of like talks about psychology and self-esteem and things like that. And what do they say? Also, like in the 70s and the early 80s, it was really popular for a lot of women, especially, to go to these classes. And I lived in New York City and Baltimore and DC. So in these urban areas, you know, like these women would actually go and learn like kind of like self-defense measures. And the first self-defense measure you learn is learning how to walk down the street with your head up and your shoulders back, right? You're kind of like standing upright, because that shows that you're not like kind of like weak and an easy target, right? And that's a more yang posture. It's like saying, I'm presenting myself to the world. I'm presenting like all of the front of me to the world. It's like confront with the front. So this also has a lot to do with organizing all the functions of the brain, right? It's the NAO, now, that's the brain, right? And that's a yang function. So if you actually look at different scans of like brain activity, it looks like lightning going off, which is really fascinating, right? And what is lightning? I mean, it's like this electrical force that's drawn down from the earth, but extending from heaven, right? So, I mean, if you kind of use your imagination, it's kind of like this rope of electricity that like gets shot down. So when you look at different scans of mental activity, it looks like a lightning storm. It's really fascinating. I encourage you to like look up like YouTube videos of that. If I come across any from my memory, I'll send them to you. All right. So the other yang functions of the body, which are related to the qi, which are warming, transforming, protecting, ascending, holding things firm, right? Preventing prolapse, right? And protecting, especially in terms of our wei qi, right? And it's said to govern the yang humors of the body, which is the spine. And when they mean the spine, they mean the spinal cord, the central nervous system, and the brain, right? Which is sort of like the flower of the spine, right? Which is like the stalk. What else? So also it mediates our sensory motor tract, right? So when you reach out and you touch something hot and you pull your hand away, right? That's GV, along with maybe the bladder and other officials, right? But that's a primarily GV response, right? You're not sitting and thinking about it. You're moving your hand almost like lightning would move, right? It also has a lot to do with our personal expression. So Jeffrey Yuen, again, he talked about it in terms of individualization, in terms of our separation from the maternal matrix, which is represented by the Ren. So this would be like the paternal matrix. I do not mean that in a sociological or gender context. I mean it in the sense of like earthy, like the womb is supposedly like, obviously it's not completely spherical, but like the womb, right, represents the extension of the Ren, and then the phallus, which is the representation of the yang, right? So it represents our separation from this maternal matrix to individuate. And that's regardless of your gender, regardless of your sex. You know, you all have to sort of emerge from and extend from and step out of the bubble that was provided by the people that raised you. Whether it's a good bubble or a bad bubble, whether you liked the bubble, whether you didn't like the bubble, whether it was healthy or unhealthy, is irrelevant. At some point, we all have to basically like grow up and be ourselves, right? So in CV, it's like at some point you have to kind of like, to some degree, rely on your own resources and your ability to gain those resources. And then on the GB side of things, it's more like, how do you literally be yourself, right? And we'll get to that a little bit later as well. So this also empowers our development of individuality and independence, right? So again, no one is completely independent, right? I didn't make these clothes. I didn't make these earbuds. I didn't create my computer, right? I don't generate the electricity that's running through my house, right? I didn't create the paper that my notes are written on. But we all have to apply our own efforts as an extension of our virtues, which is an extension of our individual nature, out into the world to be effective, right? That's how your destiny is written. So it also empowers our drive, right? So, you've got all of this raw materials, which the Ren provides. Now they need to be constructed and built and manifested, right? So that takes some effort. Like, it takes some effort to be yourself, right? You're not just sitting around on the couch like a lump, right? So the drive, the intrinsic power and movement behind all of your choices is governed by the GV, right? And in life, you kind of either go forward or you retreat. I mean, you can say you're kind of sitting still or not moving, but in a way, like, as time and space go on, and as we age, if you're not really moving forward, you are retreating. You're not really engaging, right? Um, it was interesting. My wife is really into this show. It's this Turkish drama set in, like, I don't know, like maybe like 1000 AD or something like that. Maybe, I know, it's really funny. I can't remember the name of it, but it's like Resurrection or something like that. And I remember this one guy. He was like, you're either he was talking about, like, you're either, like, he was talking about, like, his kids, like, you're either, like, willing to, like, kind of take life by the hands, or you're going to be pushing life away with your hands. I thought that was really fascinating. Um, so in a way, that kind of governs or sort of like it kind of describes our experience of GV. Like, how much do you retreat from life, and how much do you, like, engage in life? And that doesn't mean, like, I'm going to be a captain of industry and I'm going to be, like, taking over the world. It doesn't have to be like the American caricature version of success. It could be very quiet and unassuming, and has a very small sphere of influence, but it's your willingness to just be yourself, to accept what comes, and to engage with what comes to you in life, and to work with it, and to keep moving forward, right? And then on a spirit level, like, this helps us to not only strive to move forward in life, but also to strive for purpose and meaning, right? I mean, we could just be like the animals that just, like, wake up, oh yeah, time to go catch fish. Okay, time to do this, time to do that, right? I mean, it's like, you can just kind of, like, go about your day in a methodical way and get a lot done, and that's nice. But, like, is the soup infused of you infused with a lot of flavor, and the flavor of your soup is your purpose, the meaningful qualities that you bring to life, right? And that you decide on your own, like, this is what my life is going to be about. I mean, you can have others kind of tell you, and you can get assistance and support around learning about yourself, like with human design or astrology, or tarot cards, or Myers-Briggs, whatever, right? I mean, it's nice to have insight into yourself, but at some point you have to decide, this is what I'm going to do with my life, right? And I think that that's really interesting in terms of us as Westerners learning in Eastern medicine, because in Eastern culture, there's not a lot of, at least historically when these classics were written, there wasn't a lot of emphasis on individuality. You know what I mean? Like there was, like, your family, like what honors your parents, like what honors, your ancestors. And then there's, like, maybe third or fourth is what maybe you are interested in. That wasn't primary. It's very different than what we experience today. Like, I'd ask my parents, like, well, what do you, like, when I was like 14, like, what do you see for me? Like, what do you think I'd be? And my dad was like, just do what you, I can't tell you that. You got to do what you want to do. I'm like, yeah, but what do you see? Like, what do you sort of envision for me? Like, what are your thoughts about these? Like, I'm not going to tell you that. He's like, you got to go do your own thing, man. He wouldn't he wouldn't give me any guidance whatsoever. He's just like, you got to figure it out, man. You can't wait. You can't, like, don't take my advice, please. Don't take my advice. So, and this is a guy who knew what he wanted to do when he was 15, right? So, it took me until I was 30. So, but the point is, though, is like, you've got to do the work to be yourself, right? All right. And so, again, you don't want to just do for the sake of doing. What is your purpose? What's the meaning that you decide your life is about? Like, what do you get to decide that. Like, and it doesn't have to stand up in court, right? You don't have to defend it to anyone. You just share it with others, right? They like it, they don't like it, whatever. If they don't like it, then you go on until you find someone that does like it, and then you hang out with them. And so, again, like thinking about the yang nature of things, right? So yang is about movement, yang is about expansion through time and space. So think about the desire to explore and the curiosity that motivates that desire to explore, to experience adventure, to take risks, calculated risks, hopefully, that are grounded in the wisdom of your heart and your jing, right? But and there's some aspect of us that like is kind of enamored with that. Like I remember like really being like into this guy. I can't remember his name. He's a French guy, but he was the guy who put out a cable between the two twin towers in New York City and ended up like walking across. Like, I don't know. I mean, I've been on the roof of the towers, right? They used to have these like gatherings at the roof of the towers. It was really cool. They used to have these laser light shows to like Pink Floyd and all kinds of cool stuff. So it's windy up there. Oh my God, is it windy? In fact, I mean, the buildings were made to move with the wind, and it's a little unsettling like the first time you experience that. So here's a guy like, I don't even remember how many, it was like over 100 stories. It was up there. It's windy, man. I mean, it's windy on the ground by the towers. It's like super windy up there. And this guy is like, he's got this like 50-foot long pole. Like think about CV also, that creates balance and stability, right? And he's like literally like walking from one tower to the next. Like I didn't even like walking that far on the ground. This guy's up in the air. So think about like the GV and that guy, right? Oh my Lord, that's intense. So there's physiological aspects to the points and pathological aspects to the points. You know me, I like to put things into categories. So I've included that in your notes. So roughly like governor vessel 1, do 1 to governor vessel 4, do 4. In general, it has a lot to do with issues of the lower jiao, obviously, a lot to do with urogenital issues, a lot to do with intestinal issues and reproductive issues. Do 5 to do 9 is predominantly about digestive disorders. Do 10 to do 16 is relatively mostly about respiratory problems, cardiovascular issues. And then do 17 to do 21 is generally neurological issues. And that's based on pathology. Oh, and one other thing I just wanted to mention, I realized I forgot. So the Dumai allows us, the influence of the Dumai allows us to articulate our unique voice, right? And so speech is one of the most obvious and simple ways in which, and apparent ways, we actually get to know one another, right? So, I mean, you can kind of hang out together and not say anything, and you can kind of watch what somebody does. I mean, you can watch what someone does, and you can get to know them that way. But the best way to get to know somebody is to actually have a conversation with them, right? So you hear this person's voice, because this is a way of taking what's inside and bringing it out. What's in your head, what's in your heart, what are your thoughts and ideas, what are your beliefs, what's important to you, what are your values. And so speech, either verbally or through the written word, or maybe even artistically, is said to be a reflection of someone's inner voice. And the GV is what empowers that to speak, especially speaking and talking, is the primary way in which we express our unique nature, right? So I just wanted to mention that. So, thinking about like respiratory and cardiovascular and even neurological, these have a lot to do, especially do 17 to do 21 have a lot to do with the throat and speech. Right, any questions about that? All right, so I'm just gonna go on for just a little bit and then we'll take a short break. So based on the physiology, right, so we talked a little bit of the pathology, physiologically, do 1 to do 6 or 7 has a lot to do with power, right? This is the will that's rising up from Ming Men and out of the conception vessel, right? Because DO1 and CV1 are very close together. They're only separated by, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 inches at the most, depending on the size of the person. So this is where the patient as a small child begins to feel the world, that's CV, and then how they act on their impulses, that's the I am statement, right? That's the GV. And, as soon as a baby comes out of the womb, you can certainly tell their personality, but you can really tell their personality a lot by when they start to be able to move on their own, right? When they start to crawl around, and then even especially when they start to walk, like, and the way they can kind of like, when they're first able to really kind of like manage their environment rather than just sort of like, engage with their environment, right? More passively. When a baby gets like just old enough to actively engage with their surroundings, that is when you kind of get to see like the nature of their GV, right? Are they very adventurous? Are they very explorative? Are they very curious? Are they generally more passive? Are they more receptive? Are they more observational, right? and all little kids, of course, are exploratory, but you kind of get a relative sense. So that's always interesting to watch. And it's said that like right around the area of DO4, I can't show you. If we were live, I'd be able to, because I'd get on my hands and knees, and that hip thrust that helps them to move forward. The babies like to kick their legs out, right? So the first thing that's activated is around DO14, right, where they start to pick up their head. If they're crawling like toddlers and they pick up their head to look around, right, that's the first movement, right? And then the second, okay, like, oh, here's where we are. Like I can see it, and now I'm like engaged and I can actually pick a target. And then the hips kind of like right at DO4, like propel us forward and help the baby to then crawl towards something that they see. And of course, 99% of the time, they're driven towards something that they shouldn't engage with. That's just the nature of kids. Oh, I shouldn't go there. That's where I'm going first. Okay, right. Yeah. I want to grab that electrical plug. See what happens here. Oh yeah, that looks really hot. I think I'll go towards that. Oh, that can spill and make a mess. You bet. I'm going to make a beeline to that. Right. So that's DO1 to DO7 or 6. And then DO8 to DO14. This is more about our doing, our actions, and our engaging with life, right? This is how we act upon our desires. So it's not just about this is who I am and this is what I see to move towards. Now we start to act on our desires, right? And so this often will manifest in terms of our basic functionings, right? So, the I am what I do kind of thing, right? So when you're thinking about like the issues that your patients are wrestling with, right? Some are about identity, like who am I? What's my life about? And that could be about a career, it could be about gender identification, it could be about sexual orientation, it could be about, what are the virtues that I carry? What do I have to offer the world? Right? That's more lower GV. And then it's more like, well, what do I do with that? Like, I'm going to explore this particular career or that career or this hobby, right? And that's the part of us that's I am what I do. And so DO15 to DO21, that's more about the mental processing. That's more about how we think, how we act on the information that we receive. Hopefully, if wisely, then enlightenment will result. On a more mundane kind of daily level, this is like, really enlightenment is just sort of knowledgeable awareness and understanding of what was unknown before. Like you discover something new, either for yourself or for the world, right? And again, they say like there isn't anything that hasn't been done or created, but maybe that's true, but there's certainly a lot that's new for us. So like discovering something new, seeing something for the first time, right? And then thinking about that, processing it, and starting to integrate it into your being, right? And so this is like more like I am what I think about, right? And what you think about most of the time really does kind of define our reactive nature, right? So if you constantly are thinking about or subconsciously aware of like feeling threatened, you're going to react in a way that's going to be very different than somebody who's thinking about like how beautiful the sky is and how lovely the birds sound and, oh, what's that insect I'm hearing? Like the way they're going to react to certain stimuli is going to be very different, right? So if you want to really be more of yourself, like become more aware of what you're thinking about and then start thinking about something else. And then if the old thoughts come back, then just say, oh, right. Yeah, thanks for making me aware. And then go back to thinking about something else, right? Because again, you have that choice, and GV sort of is what motivates our choices. And then do 22 to 28. This is like sort of the top of the head to the point on the gum. This is more about the descent back downwards. So you've like climbed the mountaintop and now you come back down. So this represents like the integration of all of what you've gotten from the former 3 sections, right? Who you are, what you do, what you think about. Now, how do you be again in the world in a way that incorporates all those things from a place of your own inner wisdom based on your discoveries, your new knowledge, how you've integrated that, and then how you've integrated that in with who you naturally are. That wasn't your choice. You know what I mean? Like, this is how you were born or made or whatever, but this is who the you is now. And how do you want to be with that? And so, how do you move in the world in a way that's very thoughtful, right? As opposed to just primordial desires, that are just activated by reactionary forces, right? So this is sort of like I am harmoniously what I do with what I know, right? In a way that sort of defines your practitionership. You're going to be learning all these points, you're going to be learning all these theories, you're going to be learning all this information. And then how do you then learn to move with that? That is, put it into action. And what thoughts and virtues and qualities that are unique to you do you infuse into those actions, right? I mean, anybody can put their hand on somebody else, but there's the how you do that. Do you do it with compassion? Do you do it with awareness? Do you do it with intention, right? Do you do it? And don't worry about confidence. Confidence, I think, is a byproduct. And I think if you're aiming for confidence, then you're just aiming to hit the bullseye of your ego. And then, like, your confidence is going to be based on your results. And now you're going to be a slave to that rather than a slave to what's in you to do and how you want to serve, right? So forget confidence. Don't worry if you're in your practice. Don't worry if you're feeling confident. Great. If you're feeling confident, great. That's a sunny day. Good for you. If you're not feeling confident, so what? It's a rainy day. Big deal, right? Get over it. Like, don't focus on that. It's like pyrite. It's fool's gold, right? If you have it, that's nice. If you don't have it, who cares? Whatever. It doesn't mean a hill of beans, right? Your patients want to know if you're present. They don't care if you're confident. I mean, sure, there's some people that probably care, but in all the testimonials I've ever read of all the practitioners I've ever known, no one has ever said, yeah, I really like them because they're really confident. Right? Nobody, whatever. We like that in our friends. We like to be around that. That's nice. I want to see it in my football players, right? But honestly, I couldn't care less. Thank you so much. But honestly, I couldn't care less whether you feel confident in clinic or not. It's you putting your attention in the wrong place. I think I made myself clear. All right. Anyway, I just see so many students suffer unnecessarily around this, and they measure their sort of progress by how confident they feel. And I think that that's a ruse. A ruse, as they say in French. So, all right. So, yeah. So GV is more like being kind of like lifted up by heaven, right? It allows us to be independent in the world, right? So it gives us the capacity to individuate, to experience knowledge, motivation, to explore the world. So oftentimes in patients where you see it in excess, that might be because whoever raised them pushed them to explore the world too early, and that can lead to hyperactivity. I'm not saying that all people who are hyperactive because of this, but GV will certainly be involved. Likewise, it might be deficient because they may not have either been allowed to or encouraged to move out into the world early enough, or to acknowledge, a child asserting themselves, right? I mean, at some point, you have to let your kids kind of like push back, right? I mean, you want to see that. I mean, like, it's nice that your kid is dutiful and grateful, but you don't want them to be like just yes sir, yes no ma'am, yes ma'am. Like at some point you want them to kind of like push the boundaries and be themselves. And I'm not necessarily like causing trouble. I mean, just like not being like the people that raise them. It's like you have to go out, you have to help, the children like foster a sense of who they are, and not confidence, but a willingness to uh, to take advantage of opportunities to express themselves, right? Okay. All right. And that helps them to stand up for themselves, right? So, to stand up to bullies, to stand up to obstacles, perceived obstacles, to stand up to things like when life turns out in a way they don't like, or they don't get what they want, right? GV allows us to like to stand firmly and dance with that, rather than to curl up and shrink away and retreat and become resigned and give up, right? So, and oftentimes a lot of patients I treat for depression, really just for whatever reason, either in their own minds, they're doing it to themselves, or they were raised by people that like really kept them like pushing them down. Like they'd assert their unique identity, and that would be like pushed back down, discouraged physically, psychologically, emotionally, right? So, as one psychologist said, it's one thing to correct somebody when they're wrong, but if you really want to like mess with their heads, like, like, you know, like get on them or complain about them, or what do you say, criticize them when they do something right. Like that's, so this is like, like I see this a lot. Like people just like haven't been able to like, or either through their own minds suppressing themselves, or through the people that raised them, suppressing these movements to express their own individual nature. All right, so let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 9:50 and we'll go on from there. So continue with GV. So, again, one of the questions about, how to choose which GV or CV point to do, there's a number of ways of doing it. Of course, the most important way, especially for you as a practitioner, and, we talk about self-cultivation, and I think one of the aspects of self-cultivation is cultivating your own chi, cultivating your own instrument, because this is what we've got to use, right? Your body, your hands, your mind, your heart, your senses. And so palpation, really, it's the thing that everyone's going to have their own sense that they kind of are aligned with. Maybe it's hearing, maybe it's vision, maybe it's touch, maybe it's a combination. But I really would encourage you to really spend quite a bit of time, and I mean quite a bit, like literally 30 seconds to a minute, of like palpating the point before you treat it. I mean, that's one of the things I like to do, is I massage the point a little bit, generally, more often than not always, but a lot of times I'll spend time massaging the point, really feeling the point, kind of tuning in. And, a lot of times I don't really feel anything dramatic. It's very subtle, but occasionally I'll get a no, like, nope, your mind says, yeah, you want to do this point, and your heart may even guide you to do it. But there's something about the way it feels to me, or maybe it's like I'm not really feeling it clearly through the anatomy. It's not making itself available to me. Again, you always want to consider operator error, but like palpation is really important. So palpate the area. You can also choose GV points by the body area that's affected, right? What's the area of the body that it controls? The level of the point in relation to the nearby points, like especially the AEPs or the outer bladder line points. So when you see OBL in my notes, that's outer bladder line points, right? So what are the other points at that latitude? What are the other points at that horizontal level? What's the energetic nature of the point, including its name? And how does this GV point resonate with and complement the other points in the treatment? That is the treatment message that you're sending, is it very harmonious? Similar to an herbal formula, where you have like, there's a theme to the formula, right? But all the different herbs, may have different natures, and sometimes natures that are meant to balance, right? So it's not too yin or too yang, right? So does the energetic nature of the point resonate with, in terms of the correspondences, does it resonate with the message that you're trying to send with that treatment? Does it fit in nicely? I always think about it in terms of concentric circles, like a dartboard, right? You've got like the main theme, which is maybe like the point or points that like the whole message of the treatment revolves around. And then some like might resonate exactly with that. And then some might resonate a lot with that and are very supportive. And then some are more like tertiary, right? That resonate a little bit, not too disharmonious, and are more in like the supportive assistant role, right? So then also think about the functional aspect of the spirit that's affected, especially the 5 Shen, right? And then you can also think about the functional aspects of the body in terms of the substances, right? Especially with CV, a little bit less so with GV. GV is, the lower GV points definitely have a lot to do with like the fluids, and some with the blood. And all the GV points in particular have a lot to do with the qi, and then the upper GV points have a lot to do with the Shen, okay? So that's a way of like thinking about it, okay? So let's start with GV1, long strength. It's not a point that I do a lot, but it is a great point for people who really need some extra strength and some oomph in life. So you might this might show up in terms of like someone needing more backbone in life, right? It reminds them that, you know, that their basic identity is worth standing up for. And this can be a very powerful point. I generally do it while the patient is lying on their side. That's the easiest way for me. So if you're right-handed, I would suggest having them lie on their right side and you kind of like going over them. If you're left-handed, you can have them lay on your right side and you can do it behind them. Some of these points I actually like kind of like doing, like, especially in like sensitive areas, I like doing them where the patient can see me. You know, like if I'm behind the person and I'm doing GV1, like they're lying on their right side and I'm kind of like behind them and I'm like needling this way, like they don't really see what I'm doing. And even though they don't see my hands, like if I'm in front of them, they can at least see me. And again, it depends on your height and the height of your table, but just take that into account, that like some people may feel a little bit more subtly reassured when they can kind of see what you're doing when you're in an area that's generally very sensitive or vulnerable. So on a physical level, this is really good for eliminating obstructions that are in the GV and CV. Again, how might that show up? Like pain, right? Accumulations, lumps, tumors, things like that. It's really good for us resolving damp heat in the lower jowl. And that damp heat can obstruct the qi, and then things start to prolapse. So this will be like for anal prolapse, hemorrhoids, things like that, right? Also, you know, that's the opposite point of the channel, right? At one extreme end, it's going to affect the brain, it's going to affect the Shen. And so it's said to calm the Shen because it's said to clear damp heat. And damp heat can, if it's chronic, can agitate the spirit. So this can have a very calming effect, a very settling effect. It's a bit of a jolt of the qi, right? And if you haven't had this done, like I would like encourage your practitioner to do it just to see what it's like. Or, you know, after you graduate, you know, maybe you guys can get together and do points on yourselves. But I would really encourage you to do that. Also affecting the opposite end is said to like clear damp heat, not just out of the lower burner, but out of the brain. So really nice point for like constipation, hemorrhoids, anal prolapse. Some people say it's good for pain in the lumbar region. If there's an extraordinary amount of damp heat in the lower jowl, that also is like sometimes constipating somebody and they haven't had a bowel movement in a long time, that can create some back pain. So this type of point would be good for that. It's kind of okay for lower lumbar pain. It's just okay. I've had just okay results. Governor vessel 2, lumbar shu. All right, so this is it's called loins correspondence. I don't really do this point a whole lot. JR called it the AEP, the associated effect point for the genitals. So it is really good for moving qi and blood through the reproductive area, through the lower jowl, through the lower lumbar area, maybe like through the sacral area. So it is helpful for that, especially like somebody has like sharp pains, especially in the morning, right? That's yang deficiency based on blood stagnation. So this can be a nice point. It's right in that hiatus between the coccyx and the tailbone. Really nice point to like help move the chi and blood when it's kind of stagnant and they're very yang deficient. This has a lot of functions and energetics to it. It's said to be good for irregular menstruation. I haven't had like a lot of luck with that. It is really good for extinguishing wind. So there's a special technique you'll learn in the 7th trimester, hopefully with me, where you can use a certain needle technique to extinguish wind. It's kind of like you're whirling the needle around and pulling it out. You're kind of like stirring up a tornado and then pulling the needle out. So this is really good for where there's spasms, convulsions, like muscle spasms in the lower back, in the lower abdomen, right? So it's really good for that. Excuse me. It's said to treat obesity. I don't know about that. Good luck with that. That's kind of a slow, steady type of treatment. So it's hard for me to get a lot of like feedback in the moment that says, oh yeah, this point's good for obesity, because, you know, it's not like they're obese and then 100, 90 minutes later, they're not obese. Oh yeah, that point worked great. I think what they're on about is that it's very tonifying for the kidneys, and it moves a lot of chi in the lower burner. So I think it might help a little bit with like maybe the efficiency of one's elimination, yeah. So I don't know so much about that. It's said to be also good for regular menstruation, kind of okay. I generally treat it to like tonify the kidneys. So if the person's period, like if they have like amenorrhea, if it's very light, they're not producing much blood, there's not much flow, it can be beneficial to tonify the kidneys, which then supply the yin and the yang to the reproductive organs to facilitate the menstrual cycle. Excuse me. So yeah, I think really for me, it shines in terms of the kidney yang deficient syndromes. Patients experiencing a lot of kidney yang deficiency, I generally would add this point or do 3 or do 4 based on palpation, or maybe whether or not it's assure to the patient. All right, so do 3, loins yang border, also known as lumbar yang gates. Excuse me. This is a great point also to strengthen the lower back. It's found below the 4th lumbar, right? L4, right? L4, yeah. And I actually do this one a lot. I treat this a lot for really low lumbar pain. Most of the time when people come in for like sciatica or some kind of like lumbar disc injury or, back sprain, this point's generally either going to be very sore upon palpation, or what Matt Callison calls chi, you'll feel chi edema, where you palpate the area and it feels kind of like mushy, right? Like soggy, right? And so it's not really a lot of fluid technically, but it could be some there, but it feels like spongy, right? And so this is a great point to support the kidney yang, to tonify the kidneys, which again, some people say like helps to regulate the period. So, give it a whirl. Maybe it helps with that. I generally will moxa this point. I like to moxa this point a lot. Sometimes if there's like a lot of chi edema sensation, I'll even needle it deeply and then put moxa on the needle, and I'll moxa needle that like 3 to 5 times until they feel the heat. And I got the idea to do that because this point is said to expel cold and damp. So anytime you have cold and damp, cold, damp, or cold and damp, moxa on the needle is really good, right? So it warms to dispel the cold. It warms to help move the chi, to help resolve the dampness. This is also really good for people maybe after a stroke or after a traumatic injury to their low back or hips, and then their legs start to atrophy, their legs get weak. This is a really great point for that as well. I often do this psychologically on people who have experienced some kind of really crappy trauma that's affected their sexuality. Um, I often will combine this with like a Chiang Mai treatment uh, to help people gain some warmth or recover some warmth and loving associations and loving affiliations with their reproductive area, with their lower burner, with the genital region. You know, people who have had unfortunate experiences, inappropriate violations psychologically, physically. Unfortunately, I do get a lot of women who've had, suffered those experiences. And so this is a nice point. Again, fully explaining to the patient what you're doing, especially if they're tentative. Even if you don't think they're tentative, it's really nice to let people know what you're doing back there, because they can't see you, right? Um, and that can be, for any gender of any age, right, regardless of your gender as a practitioner. It also, interestingly enough, is level with the AEP of the large intestine. So this can really support like constipation, frigidity, psychological frigidity, sexual frigidity, helping to like let go of like these crappy experiences that have left us cold, stuck, which is like damp, and inert. So great point for that. It's really nice point. It gives that part of the body a lot of love. Do forming men. Can't say enough about this point. This is like such an amazing point. It facilitates, the fires of Ming Men. It's really good for like motivating people. It's obviously in line with the AEPs of the kidneys, right? And the kidneys are about the creation of power, skill, and ability stem from them. So this is like, how do you like take what you've got and do something really useful with it? There's a really funny movie. Gosh, what was it called? Napoleon Dynamite. And there's this really goofy main character, and and again, this is sort of like gender oriented, but he says, chicks dig guys with mad skills. I thought that was hilarious. And he's like learning nunchucks, like of all the mad skills to learn. But the wisdom of it is so true that like we are impressed, no matter your gender, no matter your affiliation, right? We're impressed by people with mad skills, right? So this really like kind of helps somebody like do something with what they've got, right? So of course, like what is it great for? It's like the kidney yang tonifying point, right? I mean, it's like numero uno, best of the bestest, right? Kidney yang point, right? To invigorate the kidney yang. What do I do for myself in the world? What do I do in service for others? So they say don't use MOX on this point if there's heat signs. I would say don't use MOX on this point if there's exuberant heat signs. If you have, if like the pulse is like, well, I'm not sure if it's rapid or not, and they're not, might be a little rapid, and they're not feeling hot, and they don't have a red face, and they're not super reactive, then they don't have high blood pressure, then fine. You can do like 3 Moxa, then take their blood pressure again or check in with them. But, just be mindful of it, right? So this warms the gate of vitality, warms kidney yang, benefits the lower back. It's said to benefit the essence, right? So things like all the yang deficient symptoms you'd get, like chills, feeling cold, feeling lethargic, feeling kind of tired, maybe depressed, lack of vitality. Also a lot of stiffness, right? So a lot of cold makes us inert. Cold damps makes us inert and depressed, right? So, lumbago, I love that word. It sounds like something you put on a bagel. Uh, I'd like an onion bagel with a lumbago schmear, please. Lumbago is like this highfalutin sort of fancy schmancy word for like low back pain and stiffness, impotence, things that leak out, like nocturnal emissions, irregular menstruation, diarrhea, leukorrhea, right? Really good for a lot of these cold leakages, right? Cold leakages of fluid, right? Because qi, again, what does it say? It holds things in place, right? So it warms things up, warms people up psychologically, gives them a little bit of a boost, right? You can do it, right? It's a really great point. I always think about this. It also has a lot to do with one's jing. And, can we really excel beyond our own limited beliefs to what we think is possible. This is like, say what you want about the military, but like boot camp pushes you like beyond your limitations, like challenges in life, sometimes, situations in life push you beyond your mental limits, and you find that you are able to persevere and go on. I also think about this movie that came out, I don't know if it was like 80s or 90s. There was this great movie by David Anspaugh called Rudy. And it was about this guy, a kid, he was in college, and he was at Notre Dame, and he, like, his whole life, like, all he wanted to do was play football for Notre Dame. And this guy is like the poster child for like perseverance. So anyway, go see that in your time off. It's more of kind of a guy film, but whatever. I think you might enjoy it. Uh, so, this is a really like yang tonifying, back strengthening, cold expelling, like, come on, let's go, you can do it kind of point. Really just awesome. A lot of urination problems, you can combine it with CB3, right? If there's a lot of, like a lot of weakness, like physical body weakness. Oh, you went swimming with him once? Oh, that's wild. Okay, that's pretty cool. Wow, I have to get your autograph now. You've touched greatness. So, but also like people are just like feeling like weak, like chronic fatigue kind of stuff. This is a good point. You can combine with either CB4 or CB6, also with bladder 23, spleen 4, and stomach 36. So like all over weakness, like you can combine with either CB4 or 6, bladder 23, stomach 36, and spleen 4. Really good for strengthening the body. If there's a lot of like upper body, like lung deficiency, you can add lung 7 to that. Really nice combination. So CB5, I don't really do this point that much, so I'm just going to skip it in the interest of time. CB6, middle of the spine, I do occasionally. This is really good for moving dampness in the lower area, especially that's like if there's a lot of spleen Qi deficiency that's concurrent, right? And I would say actually it's probably inevitable, not like a likely concurrence. So a lot of dampness in the lower body, a lot of stiffness. It's said to clear spinal heat. So what I've kind of made from that is somebody's had some kind of trauma, like impact trauma, like a car accident or a sports injury, where they've had some kind of impact injury, and there's a lot of like inflammation in the like the spinal column area. And I don't know if you guys have ever, you'll learn this in the 9th trimester to like how to assess bruises and what's going on with by virtue of the color of the bruise. So every once in a blue moon, I'll get somebody comes in, the bruise is black. So if the bruise is black, that means the bone has been bruised, right? The periosteum and the bone tissue, there's a bruise in the periosteum. And so, that deep of a bruise, right? Like that deep, dark purple, almost black, is like really deep level, low vessels, deep under the muscles. That would create inflammation, and then maybe that's what they mean by spinal heat. Maybe they mean things like meningitis. Maybe they mean some kind of like inflammation, some kind of itis or infection in the spinal cord. You can try that. But for me, it's a really good point for indigestion, diarrhea, hemorrhoids, prolapsing of the anus, very stiff and painful back. I'll combine this with other points. Again, I do like to moxa it, even though it's said to like clear heat. For me, also, I think about it in terms of somebody who's like kind of stuck. And it's interesting because it says it's to tonify spleen and move damp. And it's interesting is like people who are like kind of stuck in the thinking about and can't really pull the trigger and activate into the doing. It's not that they question their power. It's not that they don't have enough energy. It's just like they're just like pondering and pondering and pondering and mentally chewing on things rather than finally acting on something and then processing what comes out of their actions, right? Because again, you want to be mindful and thoughtful about what you do before you do it sometimes, but you don't want to be like so stuck in the thought process that you can't do, right? GV7, I almost never do that, so I'm going to skip that point in the interest of time. Do 8, I do quite frequently. This is at the level of the 9th thoracic vertebrae, T9. So this is at the level of the liver AEP. It's called sinew contraction. I learned it as contracted muscle from JR. So I often combine this when I do bladder 18 to support somebody who's either on a psychological level very reactive, you know, like I think about like the saying, maybe you've heard this, ready, fire, aim, right? People like that. Like I think about like the political arena, and a lot of what you see today in modern politics is sort of like, well, we need to do something. So we're going to do something. Let's do something because we're going to show the American people that we're going to do something. And then they think about like, oh yeah, maybe what is it that we should actually do now that we've done something and we're dealing with the repercussions of that. So I call it the ready, fire, aim syndrome, right? So stupid, so stupid. So I'm trying to restrain myself. So there's a lot of people who are very like reactive. They can't help it. Like it's not about mindfulness. They're just kind of like stuck in this really reactive state. Okay, that's fine. I got your message. Got it. No problem. So they're stuck in a reactive state. So this kind of helps to relax and unwind, facilitate the flow of the blood, which allows us to take the blows of life with comfort and grace. It supports the liver in what it does. So this is really about like stiffness. Maybe when the liver is overacting on the earth and you're getting like some digestive upsets and a lot of rebellious digestive chi, right? Maybe even stiffness to the point of convulsions and spasms. This is a really nice point. Someone who's really stuck in a lot of excessive blame and judgment. And that does leave us very kind of like rigid mentally and spiritually, like it has to be done this way. And if it's not done this way, it's not right. And if you're not doing it right, then you're not right. You know? And so it's sort of like that, you kids get off my lawn kind of point. And you know, if someone is contracted enough, and if there's like enough tension, that can stimulate internal wind. So that might manifest, internal wind might manifest as tremors, spasms, muscle spasms, tics, right? Facial tics, a lot of restlessness, and a lot of what I would call like pulling or gripping type pains. Again, some patients don't have a lot of like, they don't have a big vocabulary when it comes to like a lot of physical sensations. It's just, you know, they just never learned it. It's not a shortcoming, but you know, a lot of us just didn't really learn how to talk about certain phenomena. And so this is where you're going to like educate your patients to the different types of pain. And you'll learn a lot about that if you take my 9th trimester course. We'll go over all the different types of pain, including the type of pain is like that you experience viscerally when your in-laws are staying too long at your house. There's points for that. All right, so this is really good for like people who are like contracted physically, emotionally, a lot of stagnation, a lot of blood stasis, and to some degree chi stasis, and generating that also may or may not be generating wind. GV9, utmost yang. This is a point, like I used to mox it, and then I ran across something that said like, oh my God, like don't mox at this point, don't ever mox at this point, don't even think about moxing this point, don't even look at moxa when you're in the presence of your patient, right? So I'm like, okay, because it's considered to be like the utmost yang point on the body. And I think of it as like, well, okay, if the person like bends over, this is like maybe the most utmost yang point. And it is level with the spinous process of like the T7, right? Which is like diaphragm gate, which has a lot to do with like moving the blood, not just generating the blood. So, you know, here I was for years, like doing 3 to 5 mox on this point. Thankfully, no one went insane or died. So I would just say, okay, maybe I got off easy and I was lucky. So, you know, all these books say don't mox at this point. So as your instructor, I'm saying don't mox at this point. Just to be on the safe side. All right. But it is at diaphragm gate. So this really is set to open the diaphragm, relax the chest, help the person take a deeper breath. So obviously that's going to help us to feel more expansive and hopefully maybe even be more expansive in terms of our perspective and in our mind. It is good for a lot of yang things. So it's good for a lot of qi stagnation in the middle jiao. It is good for a lot of qi stagnation from damp heat that's affecting the liver and gallbladder. So this is a good point for moving the qi to help clear the heat and resolve the damp that's affecting the liver and the gallbladder. So this is really good for like liver, gallbladder, damp heat, where it's obstructing the qi. And you'll know it's obstructing the qi because the person will have a tight or tense diaphragm. The points in this area, including the back, will feel a little bit tense. They may even feel hot, and the person has a lot of damp heat signs and symptoms, right? You know, like full slippery pulse, maybe even like a bounding pulse, maybe even rapid pulse, and a lot of epigastric issues, digestive problems, right? A lot of, even like if it's chronic, a lot of irritability, right? So this is a really great point for people who are irritable in a very yang way. Like they can't sit still, they're constantly annoyed, and they're not really, they're at the point where they're not really trying to put a good face on it either, right? They really let you know about it. So I think this really also kind of like lifts us up to help keep moving through life's journeys, to kind of liberate some of the obstacles. That's kind of like what heat and damp heat can represent. Heat kind of represents the toxic forces psychologically in our life, because oftentimes when you read about heat, you'll hear about this point is good for heat toxins, this herb is good for heat toxins, because heat is organically destructive. It will destroy and deteriorate tissues. So heat kind of represents the destructive influences in your life, maybe your own thoughts, maybe your own habits, right? Maybe the environment that you're in is very toxic, right? Emotionally, psychologically, right? So take my advice, do everything you can to remove yourself from that, even if it means temporary suffering for long-term gain. Do it now. When? Now. Are you sure? Yes, now, right? So do everything you can to put in place to reduce the amount of toxic influences in your life, period. And then the heat, and then, excuse me, and then the damp is sort of like, what are these things that like weigh us down? It could be our own thoughts and beliefs. It could be the environment that we're in, right? I mean, it's late July, so it's hot and humid, which I love, but a lot of patients come in, there's like, oh my God, I just want to die, right? So, you know, they've got a lot of damp heat in their system, so we have to clear that, right? By the way, beer will not do that for you. Try as you might. All right, GB10, a really awesome point, supernatural tower, spirits tower. So another name is spirits pagoda, or pagoda of the soul. You gotta love that, right? Who doesn't like pagoda of the soul, right? That's so cool, right? Because like pagoda has like lots of different levels, and if you've never been to it, like they've opened up, like I think a few years ago they reopened the pagoda in Patterson Park in Baltimore, and I used to live like 2 blocks from there. It was so cool. All right, so this is located just below the back shu point of the heart. So it's said in one source that if you treat this point at the wrong time, you could drive your patient insane. I have no idea of how to know when it's the wrong time, or how to recognize it's the wrong time. I would assert, and this is coming from me, that the wrong time is when somebody is very emotionally unstable or psychologically unstable, right? Because the heart is about bringing order from chaos, right? By the force of your presence, right? Like, you know, you've seen all these movies where like, you know, there's this conference room and everyone's bickering and shouting and throwing papers at each other and, you know, ready to like, you know, kill each other. And then all of a sudden, like the one person comes into the room and they stand at like the head of the table or the middle of the table and they just kind of stand there. And then all of a sudden everybody just kind of like settles down. Like That's this point and GV20. Like, okay, the emperor, the empress has arrived. Like the person who's in control has arrived. Like I'm now going to just by my very presence bring order from chaos. So I would say if there's a lot of chaos physically, there's a lot of varying chi sensations on the pulse. Like if there's a lot of different pulse quantities and qualities on all the different organs. If there's a lot of chaos in their life, there's a lot of like things like left undone, not handled. The person is kind of like scurrying from one thing to the next, scattered, kind of like always like working really hard to kind of keep their head above water with their obligations. Maybe even that's you at this point in the trimester. Yeah, Worsley says 7 moxa. You know, I mox at this point, it's fine. But it's funny. You know, and again, like, you know, we all, hopefully in your life, you'll go through some time where your life is utter chaos. So you get to kind of experience what that's like. But this is really, I would say, like, maybe not treat this point where someone's like in so much chaos. Maybe do it where they're like, they can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Like not everything is in order. You don't have to wait for life to be perfect for them, you know, to do this point. But maybe when they're kind of like out of the woods and they're starting to get some semblance of ease, some semblance of settling, you know, it's not all chaos, right? So Ling Dai also refers to our ability to reason, right? So again, if your heart is present to what's going on, if there's some control happening, and I don't mean we're making everything happen we want to happen. That's not control. Control is I'm able to experience a semblance of order and presence. Then you know this also supports our ability to reason properly, right? But we all know, I can't remember the French guy that said it, but the heart knows reasons that reason knows not. So this is about like even being unreasonable in a reasonable way that's grounded in your heart, right? Oh, 7 moxa for GV9. I would say like just um, don't mox it for a couple of years. And then when you learn how to read people's energy better, then maybe you can start adding moxa to GV9. But with GV10, that spiritual tower refers to the area of the palace, the tower in the palace where the emperor or empress would go to receive the mandate from heaven, either by meditation or seeking guidance or prayer or throwing joss sticks or reading the I Ching, right? So it's that, it represents that place in us we go to for inner guidance. So maybe somebody is very like unconfident about their ability to like know like the way forward, right? To make a decision. They're not really sure about like how to, you know, they're not clear about what they're getting from their intuition. This might be a nice point to do for them, right? Physically, it's said to help the chi move through the neck and the throat and the upper back. So that's that point. So GV11, let's see. Do we need to take a short break? Why don't we take a short break? Yeah. So it's 10:27. Why don't we come back at like 10:40 and then we'll continue. So with GV11, Spirit Path, Shen Dao, right, which is different than Ling Dai, right? So the Ling is a different spirit than the Shen, right? So I think we've talked a little bit about that, right? The Ling is our capacity to, it's the spirit that empowers us to take effective action in the world. You know, you do the, it shows the female shaman offering dances and jade to heaven for rain. So they're not just going, I wish it would rain. You know, I mean, they're actually like getting off their butts and they're doing something. They're making offerings of something that's valuable to them, right? They're taking action. Again, it's meant to be metaphorical, and it maybe there was a time when that wasn't so metaphorical, but you know, like you're taking effective action. This is a Shen Dao, so this is more about like the spirit path, the way of the spirit, right? So this is like more about the being. This is level with the sorry, the previous one was just below the level of the heart shoe. Forgive me. Just GV10 was just one below it, right? That's that Gao Huang region, right? So this is at the level of the heart shoe, right? So this is really about, and it's said not to needle this point because it could disturb the Shen. So you know, like I have it in my notes with like all caps and 3 exclamation points, like do not needle. So this is about moxa ing only, a very gentle nudge to the spirit. It has to do with regulating the heart chi, right? So if the heart has enough chi, right, it has the resources it needs to do what it needs to do, and therefore then we're calmer, right? I mean, if you go to your ATM and you see that there's $11.50 in your account, and you normally have like $1,000 in your account, you're like, oh my God, right? I don't have the resources I need to just be. So this helps to people just be, to settle into their own skin, which is also kind of a blood issue, like to be comfortable in their own body, but also just to be comfortable in themselves. That's a heart chi thing, right? So, you know, palpitations, insomnia, poor memory, anxiety, minor anxiety, stiffness in the back, right? Because when we get anxious, we get a little bit tight, right? And then that eventually can stifle the chi that moves through the chest, affecting the lungs. So some people might show up with coughing, right? Some tightness in the chest, right? A lot of people with anxiety experience tightness in the chest, palpitations, hard to breathe, maybe coughing. So this is a nice point to help them settle. This is it's really like when you want to help sort of like quiet somebody, which actually over time is a very energizing, like what comes from that. Like oftentimes I mean, how many times, I can't count the number of times patients come out of the room and they say, this is so weird. Like, I just don't know how to describe this, but like, I feel so like relaxed, but I also feel really energized. I'm like, this is how we're supposed to feel. Like, really? Like, yeah, this is like normal state. Like, oh my God. So, uh, you know, like to help connect people to their own path, their own inner joy, their inner contentment. It's not a blaring of trumpets, hearing the angels singing kind of point. It's more like, oh God, I finally feel like myself again. Yeah, thanks. That's cool, right? So you're relaxed and energized, a little bit more content, a little bit more lighthearted, right? You know, this is like a little extra boost to the heart chi, and then also like it's a regulating point. So someone might be a little bit too heart yang, too much fire, too much coffee, too much stimulants, too much, you know, watching. I don't know what the modern equivalent to like 24 would be. Uh, you know, too much of that like late at night where you're watching, or you know, you're watching the news, like the Terror Channel, otherwise known as CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, the three main terror channels, um, or the channels of irate behavior and righteous indignation. So a lot of that late at night, like it's agitating, right? It's not like, oh, my world is on fire. It's just like, right? So this is like helps to kind of calm things down a little bit, right? Right? Don't watch the news before bed. Oh my God, just don't, don't. I know it's addictive. I know it's hard to look away, but just don't. Like, watch it in the morning after you've had your first cup of coffee and you're like settling into things, like, or just don't even watch it at all. There's really, just don't. All right, that brings me to GV12, which actually has a lot to do with like how we deal with the news and all this other raw sewage that comes streaming into our consciousness. So this is at the level of the back shoe of the lung. So this is a great point. I think this is yeah. So this is like at the, what is it? The third spinous process, right? The third intervertebral space. This is a great point. It's body pillar, right? So I look at this as really like the endurance point, like, you know, not just about the endurance of like raw perseverance, like the will to live. This is like, okay, like, you know, I've been through some stuff. I'm going through some stuff. I'm not knocked on my feet. I'm not crumbling, but I'm getting like knocked around a little bit. I'm getting buffeted by the winds of change and circumstance. Um, and so this adds a bit of like inspiration. You can combine it with bladder 13, the AEP of the lungs. This is a really great point to bleed, in combination with some other points that I'll mention later. But basically in combination with bladder 42, Deadman's bladder 42, Worsley's bladder 37, which is the outer bladder line point for the space below the, like the third intervertebral space, right? Third intercostal space, like T3. So you would bleed this point along with like bladder 42 for someone who's coming down with a wind cold or wind heat invasion. It's in the acute state. So amazing, so amazing. I mean, it's just incredible, right? So you cup it, you get some blood up, right? Let it cup for about a minute, 2 minutes. You get some suction going, right? When it starts to turn red, doesn't have to be dark, but you know, like darker or pinker than the skin. And then you take it off, put the cup back on the gun, you puncture it with a lancet or a 3-edge needle, then you put the cup back on, you draw some blood out. And then you do that with bladder 42 so at the level of like T3. So great for wind cold invasions, wind heat invasions of an acute nature. Really great. Like, so in the first, like within like the first couple, maybe even 3 days, if they have a hardy constitution, it hasn't like gone way into the internal organ level where they're not a lot of like coughing up colored phlegm, you know, where they're just still like getting like chills or chills and fever, alternating hot and cold. Like the first couple of stages, really phenomenal treatment to do for people who are coming down with a cold, coughing, asthma, obviously, right? This is in the neighborhood of bladder 13, which is the AEP of the lung. So any kind of like lung stuff going on that has a lot to do with the chi, and the person's chi is weak. How do you know that? The pulses are weak. The pulses are empty. The pulses are low in terms of the resilience of that pulse, right? Coughing, wheezing, shortness of breath. What else? I'm trying to think. Yeah, maybe they have habitually get colds easily, which means they have like weak wei qi. So this helps to tonify the lung qi. Maybe you hear it in their breath. You know, they have like a weak voice. It sounds like they're, you know, having to work hard to get their voice out. Could also be stiffness or even convulsions and muscle spasms in the upper back. Maybe even like to some degree skin problems of more of like a deficient nature, mostly, but also of an excessive nature. So deficient nature would be like, there's some like that chi edema sensation, the skin feels cold, like a lot of accumulations, like edema light, especially in the upper body, puffy face, buffalo hump, right? Which people see in like the older folks because like of an accumulation of wind trapped, and all of a sudden becomes like wind damp trapped in the upper part of the back. And this represents things that like people can't change, and it kind of like wears them down, right? So body pillar, this is like, okay, like I think also in terms of the lung, like the patient has suppressed a lot of grief and sadness, and they're holding that in their upper body and their chest. They're probably not going to feel it in their upper back, but maybe when you tap into, like, feel their upper back or connect to the energy of it, you might feel a lot of grief and sadness that's now affecting their lungs. That's of a more of a yang nature. They're more resigned. They're more like given up. They feel more like an inability to take effective action, right? Like a collapse of yang, right? Yang qi deficiency type on a psychological level. Okay, so do 13 kiln path, also called the molded path or the way of happiness, Tao Dao, right? Also known as furnace of the Tao. This, yeah, so this is a really great point. I'm sorry, you know what? I think this is actually, sorry, when it came time to bleed the points for the cold, I misread my notes. It's this point along with the outer bladder line point of the T3. Sorry, so it's just below T1 in the dew line. So it's an intervertebral space just below T1, this point, with bladder 42. I'm sorry, I misread my notes, so I apologize for the confusion. So it's this point, do 13, along with the outer bladder line point, bladder 42. That's really good for bleeding for colds. So hopefully that will clear up the confusion. I misread my notes. All right. So this point is, where body pillar like kind of helps us to stand up and face, the challenges that are kind of like mildly knocking us around. This is about an even greater level of perseverance, an even greater level of endurance, but also about the communication with our body and our spirit, so we can feel contentment in our body, right? So this is about being able to connect to our path in a way that allows us to experience some contentment and happiness, right? So this is the point that you would bleed for an acute invasion of wind cold or wind heat, along with bladder 42. Worsley suggested that it's really good for helping enhance the connection between our body and our spirit, because a lot of times like our spirit will communicate directly to us with our body. Like you'll be thinking about a decision, or you'll be thinking about like, which road do I go down, right? Which path do I take? And at some point, you want to reason it out and think about the pros and the cons. But at some point, you also kind of want to check in on a body level, like, how does this feel? Does it land right? I mean, not everything is about making us feel comfortable, but there's also like a rightness or a correctness or a quality to it, even if it makes us feel a little bit nervous and it's like something new and I don't know how it's going to go, and I feel a little vulnerable and shaky. I might feel unconfident, but beneath of that though, there's this sense of like, this kerthunk yesness quality, and it's hard for me to describe in words, but it feels right in your body. Like the guy who used to run Sony, when brought it from this, like transformed it from this small like mom and pop company to this like global corporate icon. People were like, how did you do that? And he's like, well, anytime I was thinking about a deal, I would eat the deal. And people were like, they thought he was like, maybe his English was poor and he was mistranslating, and so he was like, no, like I imagine eating the deal, and like, how does it taste? Like, how does it feel like when I digest the deal? Like he would literally take it into his body, through the power of his imagination. And so I would say this is a really good point to help enhance that, to help give us a sense of like strength, to help give us a sense of our ability to pass life's tests and challenges, because life is sort of like a crucible, and we are like beings of water and earth, right? That's that clay, right? So that's that mud. And so kiln path is like, you have to go through the crucible of life's challenges and difficulties in order to become like hardened, and not hard as in like unyielding, but or hard-hearted, but hard as in firm and set and established, right? I mean, you want your clay pot to go into the kiln to be to be transformed through the challenges and the difficulties of life, and to remind someone that they have the yang resources they need to get through that they're not as weak as maybe their mind says they are. So this is good for, on a physical level, for clearing heat, clearing wind, clearing cold of acute nature. This is also really good for supporting people through transitions. So I often combine this with liver 13. I often combine it with spleen 3 and stomach 36, maybe even CV8, and maybe even liver 1 and liver 3. So this is a nice point. I often combine it with CV8, sometimes liver 1 and 3, definitely with liver 13, spleen 3, stomach 36, to help someone like kind of like steel themselves to like be firm with themselves in the midst of transitions and changes, right? There's a really good point for that. All right, kidney 14, great hammer. Really nice point for supporting the nutritive and defensive qi, right? Supporting the yin qi and the wei qi. It's said that all 6 yang channels converge at this point. So obviously, what are the things that harass us, that upset us, that make us sick? That's of a yang nature, right? Wind, right? And acute cold, like external pathogenic factors, right? Wind, cold, heat, not so much damp. So these are and even cold is like a yin factor. I get that. But if it's an exterior factor, right, that is still relatively yang. It's a yin within the yang, but it's still an external pathological factor. And that is by definition a yang pathology, right? So I remember when I flew out to California with a buddy of mine. We were going out to this like healing school in California, and I was like really worn down. I'd actually just gotten out of the hospital. I had been very ill, seriously ill, and for quite a while. I was like really run down. I just tend to have a lot of like weight. My wei qi was really low. My yin qi was really low. I was just like really just very convalescent. I was in a really bad state. And so I flew out to California, so of course I got a cold on the flight, uh, and it was a drastic change in temperature and climate. And so my buddy, thankfully, was in the acupuncture class just a year ahead of me, class of '93, and so he sat me down on the edge of the tub, and he proceeded to do 50 moxa on GV14. It was like, oh my God. I mean, I could feel like my stuff start to get warm. Then I started to get hot. And then I started to like this very light sweat. And then just as the sweat started to get a little bit more pronounced, he stopped. And then we like covered me up. And I just sweated the cold. I mean, it was like amazing. Like the next morning I felt amazing, amazing. So this is a really great point to expel wind cold, wind heat, wind. It's also said to expel interior heat as well as exterior heat, but it's really phenomenal expelling exterior, especially acute invasions of wind cold, wind heat, wind, as well as clearing interior heat. It's so tonifying to the yin nutritive qi, very tonifying for the wei qi. Uh, it helps to stimulate a little bit of a sweat to kind of clear out the heat, clear out the external pathogenic factor. And then, so when it clears out these external pathogenic factors, it's going to calm the shen, right? So it tonifies also, it's said to tonify the heart yang, right? So I'm not really sure the mechanism for doing that. But, Jeffrey Yuen say it would refer to like helping support the heart in terms of like, what am I searching for, right? So think about like in the baby, the little child, the first thing it starts to do is like learn to pick up its own head and to survey the world around itself, right? So what am I searching for, right? So this is really good for people who like, they seem to be pursuing a lot of things, but they don't really seem to have a grounded sense of like what it is that they're wanting or what it is that they're looking for in life. So this is a really great point for that. I think it has a really phenomenal effect on people who are really stuck in a lot of fear or stuck in a lot of strong emotions that are kind of like, wind is like a sudden surge of emotions. They have very reactive nature. Their emotions change a lot. They're very emotionally labile. That's like wind. Cold is a lot of fear, nervousness, anxiety. Heat, a lot of like anger, frustration, aggression, impatience, irritability, right? Cold, when chronic, can lead to like depression, sort of like a collapse of yang, right? Again, they don't know what they're looking for in life, but they're looking for it pretty frantically. And so it's also really good for like clearing a lot of like heat that leads to fevers and insomnia, people who feel hot late at night, a lot of allergies, skin rashes, right? So it's good for clear epistaxis, nosebleeds. So it's good for clearing that heat that's stuck in the head, that's creating insomnia, agitation, allergies, headaches, right? Yeah, feeling kind of like lost, confused, someone like that. Okay, does that make sense? Really nice point for all of that. Gate of dumbness, I don't really do this very much, do 15. It's also called gate of muteness. Supposedly, if you angle the needle upwards too much and you needle too deeply, you can penetrate some area of the brain stem, which makes people mute. I don't know if that's really true, but honestly, there's really no need to needle it more than half a sun, like 5 fen, and that's plenty to get the experience, the chi of the point. I look at it as more about combining it with stomach 9 to support one's ability to be more comfortable with the idea of expressing themselves, right? So I often combine it with stomach 9 to help someone be more comfortable with the idea of expressing themselves, to expressing in their mind, to speak their mind, to express their feelings, even if it's inconvenient or unpleasant. So this is said to physically be supportive for people who have suddenly lost their voice, or they have problems with their tongue articulating words and speech, right? It's also said to be good for like someone has like a lot of rigidity and tension in the head and the neck, and it seems like there's a lot of signs and symptoms that go along that point to wind. So especially that's affecting like the throat. So they have a lot of signs and symptoms that also go along with this stiffness of the tongue, stiffness of the neck, hard to move the neck, hard to move the head, right? The muscles around the neck and the throat feel upon palpation to be really tense and tight. Yes, you can moxa GV14 to clear heat, by the way, going back to GV14. So again, it's that external pathogenic factor you're clearing out by activating the yang wei qi with the moxa. So it's not just adding heat, right? So you can use moxa to clear heat. So do 15, yeah. I really combine it mostly with like stomach 9 to help somebody, like if their throat is tight or tense, they have a lot of like throat issues where it feels very dry, hot, again, yang nature stuff, heat, wind, and also to help them be more comfortable with expressing themselves and speaking their mind and expressing their emotions, even when it's unpleasant or inconvenient, right? So do 16, I don't really do this a whole lot. It's said that if you needle this upwards too intensely, you can damage the central nervous system. Again, I just wouldn't really needle it that deeply. It's part of the sea of marrow, which you'll learn about a little bit like next class. And maybe we might talk a little bit about the seas later on today, within like the next 40 minutes. It's also said to eliminate wind. I do this generally more in terms of the wind type stuff. So headaches that come on suddenly that affect the back of the head, where there's characterized by a lot of tension, muscle spasms, stiffness, right? Maybe it comes and goes, right? So this is more like wind type headache, or sudden dizziness, sudden visual disturbances, blurry vision, floaters, sudden fainting, right? Sudden, like the dizziness where you feel like the world is kind of swirling around you, right? That kind of dizziness, maybe suddenly blurry vision, sudden headaches that start maybe in the neck and work their way up the occiput to the back of the head. Really nice point for that. And it's called wind palace, right? So obviously it's going to have a lot of effect on expelling wind, especially when you needle it properly, right? So do 17, I don't really do this much. Again, I use it with like the sea of marrow treatment. This is more for like neurological issues and correspondences. You can combine it with CV16 for a lot of that sudden neck stiffness, headache that starts at the neck and like works up into the occiput. Like maybe even like lockjaw, like sudden like muscle tension in the jaw, sudden dizziness, right? Things like that. That's generally why I use GV17. Neurological issues, right? It's called brain's door. now hu, brain door. So this is said to benefit the marrow, and by expelling the wind that harasses the mind and the senses, and also over time can make someone very blood deficient and affecting the marrow. Right. So it's really good for like wind invasion, stiffness, headache, stiff neck. Right. Um, do 18 and 19. I don't really do those very much, so I'm going to skip those. Do 20 is something that obviously I do a lot more of. This is part of the three treasures treatment, which is do 20, CV17, right, on the chest, and kidney 1, right, which refer to the Shen, the Qi, and the Jing, which are represented by the Shen at do 20, the master point of Qi, CV17, and the master point for Jing, kidney 1, right? So this is often a point that I'll do. You can do this for deficiency situations and excess situations, right? So this can really like raise the yang, and it can also like expel and vent the excess yang and help to like descend the qi as well. So on an excessive end, there could be a lot of rising wind symptoms, liver yang symptoms, and again, the deep channel of the liver, like a deep aspect of the liver channel, goes through the brain and connects to do 20. So if there's a lot of liver yang rising, liver heat, leading to liver yang rising symptoms, right? Sudden headache, sudden dizziness, sudden vertigo, combined with like irritability, kind of like an unsteadiness. And that irritability, right, it's affecting the liver blood, it's affecting the Shen, right? Which can lead to like sudden headaches, vertigo, tinnitus, right, which is a sign of wind affecting the ears, insomnia, a lot of sinus and nose issues, right? This is a really great point to help kind of descend and calm that rising yang, to vent out the extreme excess, and also to help settle and descend. JR used to describe this point, he called it 100 meetings. Sometimes it's called upper summit, right, Bahui. But he said it's almost like, again, when I mentioned like the heart that came in and brought order to the chaos by virtue of their presence, this is like the leader, like your inner governor coming in saying, they're there, everything's under control, it's all going to be fine now, we're going to take effective action. Again, yang, right? It's not just about being, it's about doing. We're going to take effective action that's going to bring order to chaos, right? And what creates chaos? Wind and heat, right? So this is also really good for treating the opposite end of the channel. So this is really good for hemorrhoids, anal prolapse, right? Jing issues, okay? So really nice point for that. I do it when people are like kind of like manic, a little like agitated, a little excess yang, more out of control than they normally would, more reactive, right? That wind heat kind of psychology of like kind of like irritable, reactive, and then they realize they're reacting and they're like, oh God, I wish I could keep that like under control, but they can't because there's too much like wind heat. On a chronic level, that can develop phlegm, which then obscures the sensory orifices, obscures the mind, and makes us a little bit crazy, right? We don't like, people who come up with a lot of conspiracy theories. They're not able to like assess the facts and reality of what's happening accurately. Their vision, their understanding of things, again, by the brain, is very distorted, twisted, altered, and they become damp. Again, remember, like damp, it's not as fixated as like cold, but it kind of like sticks things in place. So like people's thoughts like become very stubborn, obsessive, like, so whatever they're feeling, it becomes very like concretized and stuck in. Like they're not easily reasoned with. If you show them the data, they're still not going to be like open to receiving it because they're so full of their own damp phlegm that they're not able to like see or hear or communicate accurately or be open to receiving new information through their senses accurately, right? They're kind of like stuck in the mud, their own sort of like stubborn ideas and thought patterns, right? So this is a really good point for people like kind of clearing a lot of that and combine with other points to resolve the damp, right? So you can also combine this with kidney 1 and kidney and CB17 for the 3 treasures to help someone really balance body, mind, and spirit. Okay. GB21, I don't really do very often. Sometimes I'll combine it with do 20 to really help calm the shen. And, I'm just palpating around. That feels very active, either to me or to the patient. So do 21, again, I don't really do that too much. It's called before the vertex. Again, it's just not a point that I do very often. Again, just more of a supportive role. Same with do 22. Don't really do that much. Do 23, phenomenal point. Upper star or hall of brightness. So this is like one sun back of the hairline, anterior hairline. So, obviously my anterior hairline isn't what it once was. My anterior hairline probably used to be about here. Now it's about here. Probably another year it'll be back here. So you want to look for the change in the nature of the skin and the scalp. Even if someone doesn't have a lot of hair, there's a qualitative difference in the tissue that separates the skin of the forehead and the skin of the scalp, right? On men as well as women, right? So that's where you're kind of looking for the border. Oftentimes, the scalp tissue is brighter and less striated and looks more like a coating rather than something that has like is subject to lines and wrinkles. Okay, there's not a lot of wrinkles in the scalp, right? You don't really see that so much. Yes, Diane Conley does use this point a lot. In fact, when I used to mentor with her and Bob Duggan, especially at Penn North Neighborhood Center, which we all started back in '95. I used to like sit in a lot of those treatments. And I mean, she did this on just about everybody. It was really an amazing point. It's kind of like, it is considered to be one of Sun Si Miao's ghost points. And it's really great for not just like sinus problems and opening the sinuses and clearing wind and heat from the face and the head. It is said to open the nose, right? Which if you think about it on a psychological level, kind of like opens us up to like to wake up and smell the coffee kind of thing, to like wake us up and open us to like new inspiration, taking in things new that inspire us, which is a more of a yang type experience, right? So this is also said to be for people who are seeing things that aren't there. So again, this theme of clearing like damp and phlegm from the orifices so we can be more present to reality more accurately. And I think it's a great point for reminding people of their own upper starness, right? Like that you are a very unique, one of a kind, and very special and important, precious star in the constellation of humanity. So I do this point a lot for people who have like a lot of like resignation and low self-esteem. This is nice to combine maybe with liver 1 and other points, maybe on their CF. Really phenomenal point. Yeah, such a great point. I look at it as sort of like clearing out the cobwebs of the mind and the soul. I really like it, sort of like clearing out the cobwebs, and like we're just kind of like full of our own crappy thoughts and the experiences and influences from the world around us if we're exposed to a lot of like toxicity and negativity, right? Shenting Spirit Court, do 24, which is like about a half a sun into the hairline. I learned it as white crevice or plain bone. It's also known as Spirit Court. This is a really nice point, again, to also open the sinuses. Somebody's got a lot of like wind and wind heat affecting the face, drying out the sinuses, making a lot of like phlegm and mucus, a lot of allergy symptoms. So it's really good for all of that kind of stuff, sinusitis, rhinitis. It's said to cross with the stomach. So I think about like stomach 1, there's like this deep pathway that joins with the stomach, which again, starts here and goes down the front of the face. So, things that are affecting the eyes, things that are affecting the head and the face. And then also psychologically, like a lot of mental restlessness, anxiety, fears, insomnia, poor memory, a lot of sinus issues. Somebody's just like a lot of cloggedness in their head, in their face, as well as psychologically. They, they're kind of like stuck in their ideas, stuck in their mind about things. Think about like conspiracy theorists who are like absolutely sure that this story is absolutely true, and there's like no talking them out of it. um, and it's fine if they have those beliefs, but like, are they able to be present and take effective action based on that serves them in the world? Or are they just kind of like caught in this rumination that just kind of drives them crazy and doesn't do anything but agitate them and the people around them? Right, that's the difference. So that's, and then there's yin tang, right, which is called spirit hall, or hall of seal, or no name, um, or just people just call it yin tang, right? So this is a really nice point to do for calming the shen. It's kind of like the third eye point. Master Dong called it tranquil and still. I really like that, tranquil and still. So this is a nice point to calm the third eye. We're aware of a lot of things that we're not aware that we're aware of, if that makes any sense. So basically, like, you're perceiving a lot, and your mind is actually, the job of the mind is to filter a lot of that out. So what you're experiencing and perceiving conforms with what you've already experienced and know, so that weeds out any threats, right? Because we don't like the unknown, we don't like the uncertain. To some degree, like, biologically, we're hardwired to be wary of the unknown and the uncertain. It represents a threat because we don't know it. We don't, it's not predictable, it's unpredictable. So we don't know if it's friend or foe yet. So this is a nice point when some people who are like really, I don't know, like psychically sensitive, psychologically sensitive, maybe you're like super aware of like how other people feel, you might be an empath, and sometimes we need to just like close our eyes and leave the world of duality and return to the world of unity, right? So that's why it's best to meditate with your eyes closed, right? It's best to sleep with your eyes closed. It's best to rest with your eyes closed. Oh, I just need to sit back and like close my eyes for a second, right? To get out of the world of duality, to get out of the world of yang information, and sort of be open more to the yin aspects of the yang mind, the yin aspects of the brain, right? Which is about just general awareness, sensitivity without processing, right? So it's like this passive awareness. So some people, like, they're so overly stimulated and they're not aware of how sensitive to stimulation they really are, because maybe they have a lot of stories or pictures around that as being weak. Um, and so they tend to kind of override that, and they get overstimulated, and so they have trouble sleeping, they have trouble being with their own thoughts, they have trouble being in the presence of people who are very emotional, but they kind of push through it anyway. So a lot of empathic people. So this is really good for like calming all of that down, returning us back to our unique unity, to return us back to the possibility of the unity of all things, where we're not making distinctions. It's not good or bad, it's not left or right, it's not yes or no, it's not black or white, it just is, right? And so it allows us to just is, it allows us to just be, um, and to like, okay, right, let me just come back to myself and just rest in the void, right? There's nothing to do, there's nothing to think. Recently I just actually went through this, for my Khadijah's birthday. I got us a thing, what do you call it, like a we got to go to I booked us an appointment with this float tank, right, in Colombia. It's called like the Journey Within Wellness Center. It's off of 100 Executive Park Drive. And like, they have these float tanks. I don't know if you've ever been in one. It's sort of like a sensory deprivation tank where you float. It's like 10 inches of water with 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt in it. And if you want, you can turn all the lights off and no sound, and you just float. And they give you this thing to put on the back of your head, so it like keeps your head up. And it was so cool. I mean, these 60 minutes, I mean, I thought it was like 10 minutes went by. It was so amazing. So I think of like yin tang as sort of like the sensory deprivation tank, uh, like therapy session. You know what I mean? Like where they close their eyes and they just kind of just float. Really nice point. Also really good for a lot of sinusitis and sinus congestion too. GB25 is a great point to bleed, to clear heat out of the face. For people who have rosacea affecting the nose and the tissue of the nose, they used to call it drinker's nose. I think it was like W.C. Fields was famous for this. Even like Bob Duggan kind of had that, like he had a really red nose and the tissue was starting to a little bit disfigure because of that heat. So different types of rosacea, a lot of heat, dampness affecting the face, affecting the sinuses, affecting the eyes. It's really good to bleed. This point is right at the tip of the nose. It's actually not so bad. I've bled it on myself. It's kind of cool. And it's also said to be like the hangover point where it like immediately detoxifies the lungs. So it brings the detoxification process out of the liver and into the lungs. So you bleed this point and you're literally like breathing out the alcohol, you're breathing out the toxins rather than having it processed as much in the liver, which I thought was kind of neat. You can try it, see how it goes, like drink heavily. And then, when you start to feel a little bit hungover, like when you wake up the next morning, first thing you do is like bleed this point, or maybe like before you go to bed and you're feeling, pretty hammered, see if you can kind of like manage to do this without hurting yourself in your inebriated state. Bleed this point, squeeze some blood out and then see how that goes, right? Yeah, right? Trial and error. Your patients will look at you with great fear as you start to describe what you're going to do to this point. But then once it's over with, they're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. GB26, though, is all it's cracked up to be. It is as painful and even more so than people say. This is great for people. This is called extreme water trough or middle of man, middle of the person, Renzong. It's just like maybe in the upper third of the philtrum. This is a great point to do when somebody has trouble bending over and straightening back up, right? So if they have a lot of pain or stiffness upon bending over and straightening back up, this is like the go-to point. It's so phenomenal at benefiting the chi that moves through the lumbar spine. It's really good for acute sprains of the low back, or actually any part of the back, acute sprains, where the pain is in the center itself. The pain may radiate, and that's fine, but the pain isn't like just in the muscles. Like you want the pain and stiffness to be felt in like that spinal column area as well. That's sort of like that, and inability to bend and straighten up is like sort of like your go-to indications for this point. I gently reduce this point while the patient is like on their back and they're kind of like doing cat-cow as much as they can while they're lying supine on the table. It's really good for expelling wind and heat out of the face, out of the dew channel. And it's kind of miraculous. My first real great experience of this, I was at a health fair. I used to help out this people that ran the Baltimore American Indian Center in Baltimore, and they would have these like health fairs, and sometimes like at the powwows, I would have this like little circle of like acupuncture where people get auricular treatments. And then I remember like this one guy, he was one of the dancers actually. He came over like in full dress. It was so cool. He was having like a horrible time dancing. He was like in a lot of pain, and he was sort of like in a break between dancing performance sessions. And so he came over, so like the head of the American Indian Center sent him over to me and said, can you help him out? And so I think I was only like a few years out of school. And so I said, this is really going to hurt. Please restrain your desire to punch me. Like, just really, like, it's going to hurt. It's going to be intense, but hang in there. It'll last about 5 to 10 seconds, and then it'll be over with, and you'll probably feel better. And of course, like, I had no idea if this was going to work or not. It was completely just like, kind of like, it was like hopeful BS, right? So, so I took a 1/2-inch needle and I had him take a deep breath. And when he exhaled, I was like, try not to stiffen, try to relax, try to keep breathing, breathe through it. And I jabbed it in there and I was manipulating it 5-10 seconds, and his eyes are going like this. I'm like, don't stiffen up, relax, breathe. And I just like needled the bejesus out of this thing. Even went down like sort of like almost through the lip. And then 10 seconds after that, I pulled it out and he was just like, oh my God, that was awful. Like his eyes were watering, and this is a tough dude, right? So, so I'm like, okay, let's get up. Let's see if that did anything. And sure enough, he was able, it was like miraculous. He was like able to bend all the way over and then come back up. And then I just did a couple other points, like real fast, just in and out, like to open the do my small intestine 3, bladder 62. And like he felt great. He felt great. He said it was like great for like 2 weeks. So that's my sort of story about do 26. It's a mother of a point to get to get done. You just gotta like walk. You just gotta like walk your patients through it and just tell them like this is really gonna hurt, and it's gonna hurt them more than it's gonna hurt you, but they'll feel better afterwards. So like try to keep them from punching you when you're needling this point. Do 27, I don't really do that often. Do 28, I really just do for, no pun intended, I just do this in the end of a CBGB block. It also said to cross with the meridian of the stomach. So it's said to be really good for people with bleeding gums, erosion of the gums, pain and swelling of the gums. I don't really get a lot of dental problems, despite my dad being a dentist. I don't really attract a lot of that. So I don't really know if this works for that. A lot of people say it does. So I would say if somebody comes in, do this point with also maybe large intestine 4, which is the command point of the face, to clear a lot of the heat that might be creating a lot of the inflammation and deterioration. That's the receding of the gums, and also to help with the fluids of the stomach. But I just do it to treat like the last point on the CBGB block. All right. So we have a couple choices. It's 11:30. I want to finish at 11:45, but I want to see, like, is it okay if we just kind of like power through? I just want to introduce the concept of point combinations. Is that okay? Or do we want to just save it for next week? Are you guys like cooked? I don't know what YRS means.
So would this be in
Let's finish. Let's finish it. Let's finish.
Oh, wait.
Oh, yes. Not YRS. It's YES. Okay.
Is this in lieu of next week? Like he's still going to do?
Yeah. We still
in
have next
addition.
week. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we still have next week. I mean, I could just combine this with next week.
No.
Okay. All right. All right. So let's just do a little point combination. Not a lot of heady stuff. I've put some resources on the Canvas site for your benefit. This is not something that you have to memorize. I'm giving this as like, I like to give you things that you can kind of like keep either digitally with you or like in a binder in your treatment room, so you have something to refer to as you're treating your patients. A lot of times I'll say, excuse me, I just wanted to like recheck my notes about something. So point combinations, if you look on the one note I gave you, which is like basically like sort of like the class 13 notes on point combinations. And if you look at it, it might even be like listed as like from April 3rd. So it was like from the spring trimester. So, rarely are you going to do points just by themselves. I mean, rarely are you going to do just like one needle treatments. Maybe you'll be that kind of practitioner. I'm not that type of practitioner. I use points in combination. So you want to emphasize, there's different ways of thinking about how to combine points, right? As well as point combinations themselves. The most common way to look at a point combination is in terms of where it fits into the root and the branch, right? So, I've mentioned there's a number of, quotes from the Su Wen and the Ling Shu about, combining points from different areas to affect other areas and to support different treatment principles. But basically, you're going to be looking at several like ways of thinking about how to combine the points. One is root branch. That's the most basic one. The other is in terms of its elemental pair, what we call the interior-exterior relationship. This will be like what you would treat in terms of like a CF. There are water CFs, so you combine points on the kidney with points on the bladder, points on the pericardium with points on the triple heater, and so forth, right? So that interior-exterior relationship, elemental pair. The other is through the 6 divisions, or the name sharing. Taiyang, which is small intestine and bladder. Shaoyang, triple heater and gallbladder, right? So there's another ways of pairing up points, right? Maybe you would do pericardium 6 with liver 5, the junction point on the hand and foot jue yin, right? So you might look at another common combination is local distal, right? This is something that I have a predominantly orthopedic practice, but even with internal issues, a lot of people come to see me for like menstrual disorders. A lot of pregnant women come to see me with a lot of like back pain or morning sickness. They call it morning sickness, which is really these days all day sickness, a lot of nausea, right? You know, obviously you're not going to do so much local distal there, but with pregnant women, but you know, like a lot of orthopedic issues, I'll do distal points first, and I follow up with some local points in the area where there's pain, right? Same with internal situations, right? Like xerostomia. I don't know why, but lately I've had like all these patients come to see me for dry mouth, especially because they're going through chemo or radiation, and especially the chemo meds like dry out their salivary glands, or if they're getting radiation in the upper body, their salivary glands dry up. It's a really severe thing, especially in some older folks. They get dry eyes and dry mouth. So I might do CV24, maybe some points in the face, combined with some distal points, right? So that's an internal situation. There's also things that are called like Dao Ma, which are coupled points or inverted points. So these are 2 or 3 points, generally in a given area, often in some kind of line, either longitudinal or horizontal. Almost never, I don't know any that are like diagonal, that either go along a meridian or along an area between 2 meridians or across a meridian. So there's a lot of, like, those of you who may be more familiar with Master Dung points, there's a lot of these Dao Ma points where you would do, okay, like for example, like yesterday I did this Dao Ma combination for headache. This one girl, it's been like mysterious. She has like horrible migraines and nausea every day. She even gets nerve blocks, and after like 2 days, the nerve block wears off. She had a lacrosse injury. She's 15, 16. She had a head injury from lacrosse. Basically, she got whiplash and a concussion, and she has tried every medication. She's tried just about every therapy, and she finally came to see me, and she said like the nerve block would, when it helped, it would help for about 2 days, but sometimes it wouldn't hardly help at all. And it took me about like 5, 6 treatments, but then I finally kind of hit upon this Dao Ma combination of points that are between the gallbladder and the stomach channel on the leg, that start from at about 3 sun, then 2 sun, then 2 sun, about a sun anterior to the fibula, sort of between the gallbladder and the stomach on the lower leg. And that was like the first thing that really like took away the headache and the nausea. She's like, oh my God, this is like the first time I haven't felt like jumping off a cliff. And this is, you know, she's been dealing with this for, you know, 6, 7 months. I mean, this is awful, right? So, you know, she was like just miserable. And, you know, sports were her life. So that's an example of Dao Ma. You know, there's like a number of points that you can do like in a row, across a meridian or between meridians or along a meridian, that are really good combinations. Another famous one is like these bone spur points on the shoulder, right? So that's an example of Dao Ma. And we'll go over the specifics next class over specific combinations. But this is a way of thinking about combinations. So you might, and I would say when you're doing combinations like this, that they're best done when they are distal. They are best done when they are distal. The best point combinations, Dao Ma, in a line, either horizontally, transverse, or longitudinally, are done distally. There's another one called a drawing technique, Jianyin, which is you'll combine a point on the same side of a problem as well as the opposite side of a problem, right? So there's the unaffected side, and then there's the affected side or the diseased side, right? So that's ipsilateral and contralateral. I'm sorry?
Can you repeat the name?
Yeah, so it's Qian, Q-I-A-N, Yin, Y-I-N. It means drawing technique. This was articulated by Wei Chi Yung, who was a disciple of Master Dung. And so, for example, like somebody comes in with sciatica, I might do this extra point, like a very tight large intestine 4 with large intestine 3 on the opposite side of the pain, right? This is called Lingu. This is called Dabai, Linggu, Lingu, sometimes spelled Ku, Linku. I think Dr. Tan called it Linku. Same point. It's a super tight large intestine 4. So here's large intestine 4, and then here's Lingu. And then Dabai is large intestine 3, needled between the bone and the tendon towards small intestine 3. So that's Lingu Dabai on the opposite side of the low back pain or sciatica. And then you combine that with bladder 65, bladder 62, and bladder 60 on the same side of the pain. So if I have like sciatica and low back pain going down the low back into the left glute max, into the left buttock, down the left leg, right? I would do Lingu Dabai on the right, the opposite side of the pain, and then I do bladder 60, 62, and 65 on the same side. That's called a Qianyin, Qianyin. That's the drawing technique, right? So it's sort of like you've got a treatment for the area, and then you've got like what are called like the guiding points, which guide it to the area that's affected, right? Which is generally done on the same side of the issue, right? Right. If I got right-sided neck pain, I might do small intestine 3 and maybe another extra point that's like a third of the way down from small intestine 3, right? On the opposite side, right? And then I might do, points along the small intestine channel around the like 13, 14, and 15 on the, 13, 14, 15 on the same side, right? That guides it to that area, right? That's a Qianyin. So that's called the drawing technique, right? Another combination really popular is called the shoestring point combination. This is often done for pain or some kind of B obstruction affecting the body. So it's called the shoestring, like the shoestring point, right? Like the third of the element points combination. This is often for pain, generally from B obstruction affecting some side of the body. So B obstruction means wind, cold, heat, and or damp is obstructing the qi, creating qi stagnation, maybe even blood stagnation. That's creating pain. And so, so let's say you've got right side ankle pain. You've got ankle pain on the right ankle on the outside of your ankle, right? That goes like sort of, the bladder, maybe the gallbladder, but mostly the bladder channel runs through that area of the ankle where there's pain on the right side. So I would do the shoestring point of the channel that goes through the area of the pain, in this case, bladder. So the shoestring point would be bladder 65 on the same side as the pain. And then I do its 6th division complement. So bladder is foot taiyang. So I'd go to the shoestring point on hand taiyang, which is small intestine 3, on the opposite side. So for right ankle pain that goes through the bladder channel, I would do the shoestring point on bladder on the same side of the pain, on the affected side. And then I would do the shoestring point on its 6th division complement. So bladder is taiyang. So its taiyang complement is small intestine. So I would do the shoestring point, small intestine 3, on the opposite side. Right? Does that make sense? And you could tonify and then leave these in for a while. There's other ways to combine points, which I have uploaded from Dr. Robert Chu. He's also a Master Dung practitioner out in California. And he put together this algorithm of different ways of combining the different element points as well as the low points and the G-clef points. You can have a look at that. So for this type of condition, you would use, like, say, the shoestring point combined with the source string, or the shoestring point combined with the He point. Right? There's another one that's called Sacred Geometry. And there's a nice book. I don't know if you can see the title, right? It's called Esoteric Acupuncture. And it's by this guy, Mikio Sankei, I think his name. Mikio Sankei. Mikio Sankei. Right? So it's called Esoteric Acupuncture. I think he's got like 5 or 6 books now. This is volume 1. And so he talks about the different arrangements of the points in terms of their geometrical shape that's created when all the points are inserted. And if you think about like IDs and EDs, have a very similar geometry, right? You've got the most superior point in the center, and then you've got the other five, or the other, six, excuse me, the other six, like in this row, right? So it's creating this geometrical shape, sort of like an obelisk, right? Think like an obelisk, I don't know, depending on whether you're a pessimist or an optimist. I don't know how you pronounce it, right? So, right, like if you think about an obelisk, what's an obelisk do, right? I mean, that's like a tower. It's like an antenna to heaven, like it's a radio tower to the heavenly chi, right? To God or spirit, right? And it's drawing down those forces, right? So we're able to kind of connect to something beyond and in charge of ourselves. So think about like control, right? Because so CV15, the front move point of the heart protector, and do 20, right? These are about control. These are about expelling or transforming the influences that create chaos for us. So damp heat for the pericardium, wind, and the other wind, cold, wind, heat, but especially wind for do 20, right? So for the external, like, and wind is more external, right? Damp heat and fire is more internal, right? Unless you live in the tropics, which even then it's hard to be invaded by damp heat unless you have like a really a lot of exposure in the tropics, right? So sacred geometry is another one. Another point is called, just really briefly, chain and lock, and then I'll finish. So these are points that are generally done more for like way atrophy, that is like some chronic obstruction problem that's created weakness in a limb, or like muscle loss of tone, muscle weakness, drop foot, an inability to pick up the foot when you're walking, so people shuffle and then they stumble and fall, an inability to like lift something with your hands or arms, right? You know, the muscles of the shoulder and the arm feel really weak and heavy and deteriorated. Maybe the muscle tone has become very lax and flaccid because of this prolonged chronic B obstruction syndrome, which is then transformed into way atrophy. Like, so the nerves are affected, right? So proprioception, control of the limbs is affected, right? So they're very, they lose a lot of dexterity, they fumble a lot, they stumble, they drop things, they have a poor grip, poor ability to walk, right? So chain and lock, really good for stuff like this, for limb atrophy, muscle weakness, numbness, maybe even tingling, peripheral neuropathy. So these are points where you do like the point on the hip, point on the knee, point on the ankle, maybe even a point on the toe or near the toe, or similarly point on the shoulder, point on the elbow, point at the wrist, maybe a point like at the end of the metatarsals or in the fingers, right? So it's called chain and lock, where you're doing a selection of points along one meridian or one trajectory at major points along the extremity, which are often the joints, okay? So these are different ways of thinking about point combinations. Next class, we're gonna go over this in more detail, as well as how to integrate this into your practice. So again, as always, if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to contact me, shoot me a text, an email. If you wanna have a conversation, I'm open to that too, okay? All right, and I'll post the video as soon as I can. All right, y'all take care. Have a blessed day.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Time.
Thank you, Time.